In terms of cork itself, it's a carbon negative material. If you want to look at it through that lens, you don't harm the tree when you harvest the bark. It's essentially, I like to think of it as taking the fruit off the tree, like a peach off a peach tree. You're not killing the tree. Or I think maybe a more apt analogy is thinking about renewing the lungs of a tree, because you accelerate the regrowth of the bark and ultimately extend the life of the tree.
Hello and welcome back to the Outdoor Minimalist Podcast. I'm your host, Meg Carney, and I'm an outdoor and environmental writer and author of the book, Outdoor Minimalist, Waste Less Hiking, Camping, and Backpacking. The Outdoor Minimalist Podcast has the goal to give listeners actionable ways to waste less hiking, camping, backpacking, and more during every step of their process. Your impact outdoors starts long before you hit the trail and goes beyond leave no trace ethics. You'll learn how to identify sustainable outdoor brands, how to ask hard questions regarding sustainability, and begin to shift and evolve your mindset to integrate minimalism into all of your outdoor pursuits. Footwear is an area of apparel that is extremely difficult to narrow down and find sustainable options for. And we've interviewed a few footwear makers, including Steven Sashen from Xero Shoes in some earlier episodes that attest to this dilemma. Still, most footwear options on the market rely heavily on synthetic materials to make them durable enough to wear on our feet. That's why in episode 147, we hear from one founder who's harnessing the power of sustainable and effective materials for footwear. Mike Baker is the founder and CEO of ReCORK and Sole, two brands on parallel missions to create radical change for good for people and planet. Sole makes custom, moldable over-the-counter insoles that provide affordable pain relief and supported the outdoor endeavors of millions of customers. In 2008, Sole launched ReCORK to harness the untapped potential for an incredibly sustainable natural material by recycling used wine corks into high-performance composite materials and components. With Mike at the helm, these two brands are determined to forge a more sustainable future for the footwear industry and beyond. Thank you for joining me on the Outdoor Minimalist Podcast today, Mike. I'm excited to learn more about cork as a product material and get kind of a deep dive into all of the sustainability aspects that are involved. So before we get right into the ReCORK talk, then would you be able to just give us kind of a brief overview of how you got interested in outdoor recreation in your life and how it fits into your life now?
Sure. Thank you for having me. I think the credit for my interest in the outdoors probably belongs to my father. So I grew up my younger years in northern British Columbia, and it's a pretty wild space. And we would spend lots of time outside on riverbanks, boating up rivers, teeming with spawning salmon, skiing, etc. So I think that really sort of crystallized my appreciation, understanding, excitement about the outdoors. I now live in Vancouver, British Columbia, and I'm still fortunate enough to live on the side of a mountain. So I'm often chasing my dog in the trails and the hills and around the creeks and rivers that run here on the North Shore. So I love breathing in fresh air and swimming in clean water. So the appreciation started early and continues to be pretty core to what I like to do and who I am.
And is that love for the outdoors and getting outside often, is that partially what inspired your current business pursuits?
Well, I guess they're diverse, the pursuits, but certainly I do like to run. I'm not sure that I'd call myself a runner, but I do like to put one foot in front of the other. And yeah, I did have a lot of problems with my back early on in my early 20s, and ultimately found what was in my shoes and under my feet had a really significant impact in terms of how I felt. And so yeah, the desire to be active very much inspired, and then the inability to be active very much inspired the founding products that we still make at Sole, the footbed products.
Yeah, so would you mind overviewing what Sole is and then how that kind of led to ReCORK, which is the product company that we are discussing today?
Sure. Yeah. So, well, I just got into it there a little bit. The origin story was really around my own personal pain, and it seemed to me that we could, our team could bring to market a product that was somewhere between a sort of a cheap pharmacy product and a custom-made orthotic that delivered the benefit that I had experienced. So through my personal use case, I just knew there was value to be delivered to a broader audience if we could make it more accessible from a price standpoint and an availability standpoint. So we sought to create a affordable, over-the-counter, custom product, and that was 25 years ago, and we have lots of soul zealots and advocates and a number of great testimonials about how we impact people's daily strides and daily life. So that certainly, in terms of sustainability, the feedback, the honest feedback from our customers, certainly is something that continues to drive us. From footbeds, we moved into footwear, primarily with sandals, wanting to put the same knowledge that we'd come to have about how to optimize the underfoot condition into a sandal. And that was in 2008, I believe, was our first sandal product, and we've had quite a bit of success with that as well. And then ultimately, as the numbers and pure unit volume continued to increase, you can't help but pay attention to the impact of the volume of product that you're producing. So we always were, perhaps it was the early touches with nature that made this sort of a natural predisposition for me. But we're always looking to find ways to make things more efficient. And efficiency in some ways often lines up, it lines up with the title of the podcast in terms of being minimalist, but also, a way to be efficient from a sustainability standpoint, from minimizing excess packaging, from looking at the true actual input and footprint of each of the materials that we selected. And ultimately, this leads into the origin story of ReCORK, which was right around 2008. I have a friend that has a old sort of panel-boat cabin on an island on the ocean here in the Pacific Northwest, and a bunch of young families every year, summertime would gather, and it was probably 40, 50 plus people, and dogs and babies and saltwater and messes. And what struck me was that the floor in this panel-boat cabin just took a beating, right? It was just absolutely maximum wear test cases and use cases, and it was so resilient. It was so lovely to walk on barefoot or with shoes. If you dent it, the dent would self-heal over time. It was thermally, acoustically insulating, so be it all the noises that would occur in that small space, it was dampened, and it was nice and warm in the morning. So what I realized in that is that floor was cork, and it was sort of an old school thick cork tile floor, and still is, frankly. And the fact that it stood the test of time in that cabin, and I saw firsthand the wear and tear that it faced. Perhaps it was, the follow-on was having a libation or two that required the opening of a bottle, connected the dots that what was on the floor was also coming out of the bottle. And ultimately, what we're doing when we're using that cork out of the bottle is we are dispensing of a virgin raw material. It's had very, very little processing done to it. In a lot of cases, at the higher end of bottle stopper corks, it literally is just punched out of the out of the bark of the cork oak tree, and has had no processing to it other than boiling in the early stages to remove any sort of microorganisms, et cetera, to make it sort of food safe. But the idea that we would be taking this virgin raw material and simply landfilling it seemed like it was an opportunity to me.
That's wild. I don't know if I've ever seen a cork floor before. My main exposure to cork, other than the wine bottle example you have, is through yoga mats. I know a lot of yoga mats will be cork. Well, not a lot, but my favorite ones are cork.
Sure.
So that's really interesting that it kind of was inspired from that experience, and then it kind of snowballed from there.
Hmm.
And I think cork is an interesting material and one that's not really talked about that often in the sustainability space. It's brought up here and there, but I don't hear a lot about it.
Hmm.
And so I would be interested to learn just about like the general sustainability of cork, and then we'll kind of get into a little bit more about your products after that.
Sure. Um, just to follow on one of your comments there, cork flooring itself in that form factor is pretty unique. You don't come across it very often. You end up finding it more commonly laminated in, yeah, you may not even know it's there. It still ends up being laminated between hardwoods or even manufactured woods for those same properties that it has inherently in terms of thermal acoustic insulation. But to have it in that thick form is very rare because, frankly, of its price. So, in terms of background on cork and why don't we hear about it more? It's an interesting question. That the largest use case for cork is obviously bottle stoppers, is the one that you know it from most predominantly, and I think that has to do with some of the limitations. I mean, cork is an amazing natural renewable raw material. It grows on trees. It's actually, as I already alluded to, it's the bark of a cork oak tree. Those cork oak trees primarily are in the Mediterranean basin. About 30% of the cork forests are in Portugal, roughly 30% in Spain, and then 30% in Morocco, and then Tunisia, Algeria, and France and Italy have a small fraction in that order. They cover a landmass of almost 5.2 million acres is sort of the current estimate that I've seen. And it's a 250-year-old, well, that's not true. It's much older industry than that. It goes all the way back to the Egyptians lining their boats and used for buoyancy. So it's a 250-year-old industry in Portugal is probably what I meant to say there. And so basically the tree, I've been there several times. I can best sort of describe the forest as and the cork mandato as harmonious. It seems like just inherently a really lightly nurtured and cared for ecosystem and place where the best situation is cork is just simply left alone, predominantly, maybe some light grazing, and the harvest actually occurs on a cork oak tree every 10 years, and 9 to 10 years, not less than 9 years. And often what happens when the harvest happens, you'll see numbers all over the trees, all over the trunks of the trees in Portugal. And that indicates the last year in which it was harvested. So they just simply use the last digit from the year in which it was harvested. And then obviously you count forward to the next cycle. And it's in the springtime, after that 10-year cycle, that you get some moisture, humidity in the tree that allow new growth is what it is. It allows for the cork to be the cork bark to be peeled by artisans with very traditional equipment off the tree, and the cork bark will largely be peeled off the trunk of the tree and then up the sort of the major limbs. You won't go all the way to the ends of the limbs, but so it's largely a sort of a skirting of the lower component of the tree on a 10-year cycle. And the first harvest of a cork oak tree for the purpose of producing cork is normally 25 years after it's planted. And it's normally about 3 cycles from there before you get high enough quality grade for the most premium high-end cork stoppers. So it's a fascinating tree. It's a fascinating ecosystem. And there's sort of a fun saying in Portugal, if you're looking to build inheritance for your kids, you plant eucalyptus. If you're looking to build inheritance for your grandkids, you plant cork oak. So I think one of the reasons you don't hear about it a lot is it is a relatively small market. And there is certainly a lot of misinformation around cork itself, or at least inaccurate information. One of the common ones is, I thought there was a cork shortage. That's probably the number one comment that's put out there. And I think the grain of truth to that is that it's a very inelastic market. It's very difficult to bring new cork online quickly to respond to upticks in demand for the reasons I just explained in terms of the duration from planting to first harvest. So it takes a long time. You have to be very patient to grow cork trees. There are a number of efforts underway at accelerating the time to first harvest. There are a couple of pretty large scale initiatives that have brought the first harvest down from 25 years to 13 years, just with a slightly more active orientation around management of the cork forests. And the other thing that's sort of happening around increasing supply is just sort of a densification of those 5.2 million acres. So traditionally, relatively low density of trees per acre, and that's another initiative that's underway to sort of accelerate some of the density, the forest density in the cork mondado. So in terms of the cork itself, it's a carbon negative material. If you want to look at it through that lens, you don't harm the tree when you harvest the bark. It's essentially, I like to think of it as taking the fruit off the tree, like a peach off a peach tree. You're not killing the tree. Or I think maybe a more apt analogy is thinking about renewing the lungs of a tree, because you accelerate the regrowth of the bark and ultimately extend the life of the tree. Most of the trees will live sort of on average 200 years. Often, at the high end, it's up to about 250 years. So it's a very long-term sort of traditional market. And then back to the sort of the natural attributes. So it's incredibly lightweight. I believe that the density per square centimeter of the cork is about 800 million cells. So it's very microporous with these little air pockets that make it really, really lightweight. I also already mentioned some of the compressibility. It has a certain amount of elasticity to it, thermal, acoustic, insulating. It's often fire retardant. Was used sort of on the nose cone of the space shuttle program on re-entry because it doesn't burn. So there's just it's kind of a super material. I guess how I like to think about it, and I haven't come across any other natural, renewable, recyclable material that has the attributes that stack up. To try and get back to the answer and answer your question, one of the drawbacks traditionally with cork has been its fragility. So that may sound contradictory, but it does have a certain amount of brittleness to it. So you can snap a cork, and that may have occurred when you're opening a nice bottle of red or something. You can break the cork in half, and so it's that attribute that we feel that we have managed to solve for. So taking that one potential limitation or weakness and allowing through sort of some newfound processing techniques the ability to really tune the attributes to allow for different densities, different cushioning, and more ability for, torsional rigidity and tear strength. So eliminating the brittleness that's sort of inherent, as maybe one of the weaknesses of the natural raw material. So I don't know if there's anything you want to pick apart there.
Yeah, I do have one question, and well, I probably have multiple questions, but the main question I'm going to ask right now is about why you chose then to use recycled cork. Is that primarily because the market for virgin cork is so small? Was it like a price thing, or is it because you just felt like it was a waste to be throwing this material away?
I think I think the answer is in this case it's all the above. Maybe say ferrous metals is one category that gets recycled a lot in terms of something that's sent to the recycling bin or garbage bin. There's certain market verticals or sort of commodity verticals where the amount of processing to them is very, very light, right? So they ultimately are still in a virgin form or next to virgin form. And cork is in that, is of that ilk where, as I mentioned, in the most rudimentary cases, it's literally been punched with a cylindrical knife out of the bark. So nothing has been done to it. So if you can collect that cork, you're starting with the virgin raw material, and the price does keep going up of that virgin raw material. So it is a valuable raw material. Additionally, there are when you punch the traditional stoppers, a bottle stopper out of the bark, you end up with what looks like essentially Swiss cheese in the bark. And for a long time, that was called wasted cork, and ultimately, I think that's a bit of a translation issue, a language issue, where it was post-industrial cork, and ultimately they ended up calling that recycled cork. And it is recycled cork, but it's post-industrial, not post-consumer. Ultimately, they found out through doing more with composites that you could make things like trivets and bulletin boards and laminate flooring, etc. But that was all secondary, and actually, frankly, is still secondary to the primary use case, the most valuable use case of cork as it stands today, which is high-end bottle stoppers. So why did we start recycling it? We thought that if we could, I don't know if you have a big cork collection. Anybody who drinks wine, or in a lot of cultures, it's traditional to mark the date and the time that you popped a special cork. Cork has this sort of unique natural affinity to it, and people seem to keep a lot of it. Anytime we open a new collection location or partner, it's interesting that we get a sort of an initial surge of people recycling their cork. They inherently hang on to it because there's something innately special, unique about cork. If you popped a champagne cork, the tension on the top of the bottle makes the cork look like angular. It's not perfectly parallel in terms of being it's non-parallel cylindrically. And ultimately, if you let that cork expand, it is a cylinder, right? So again, that just I guess speaks to how unique that material is. You touch it, you squish it, it expands over time, etc. So there's something about it that seems to be inherently valuable, and we thought it was an interesting place to be able to carve out a specific niche to reclaim this natural raw material that's generally in its virgin form. And then the game, I guess in most circularity discussions becomes about reverse logistics and optimizing logistics, and is there a true, objective use case for creating circularity with this product? And I do think it's one of the very few unique materials that does allow for that. We can use both post-industrial recycled, post-consumer, and virgin cork in our formulations. We can differentiate between the two, but ultimately, if we're to have a larger impact, we're going to need all streams. We're going to use all streams of the resource to address the need. As we're able to remove some of the few physical property limitations of the natural material.
And then, of course, the question with circularity is, can the cork that you have turned into your composite, can that then be recycled, or is that kind of the end of its life?
No, that's what's really cool about the ReCORK composites and where we're at. So we can take midsoles, we can take insoles, and without any additional processing, we can put them into a block mold or a cylinder mold, and we can compress it. And we have some really cool visual examples of this, where you have a tread pattern on a cup sole, midsole, say, and when it looks like the shape of a shoe. It's unmistakably the shape of the shoe. So you put a bunch of those into a mold, you reheat, recompress that, and then we can shave it into sheets. And when it comes out, it looks like a shoe. Not that you want it to look like a shoe, but it's undeniably a shoe. And so it basically shows unequivocally the legitimacy of the re-recycling effort post-consumer. So circularity obviously is sort of aspirational and very hard, and there are very few concrete use cases that seem to stand up to all scrutiny in terms of their viability on multiple aspects. I think cork is one that may. So you mentioned yoga blocks or yoga mats, for example. Out of sheets, we can make yoga mats, and we can make yoga mats. There are cork leathers, there are cork fabrics. Almost all of those cork fabrics or leathers. I do have a cork yoga mat myself. It's a very thin film laminate. Now, we're talking like 0.3 millimeter thin. It's laminated onto a fabric substrate that's then laminated onto foam. When we are talking about recycling midsoles or other products into a sheet and then making, say, a yoga mat out of it, we're talking about something that's 75% cork and has that tear strength, rigidity that is not fragile, that is not easily broken or ripped. So again, it's the breakthrough that we've come across with ReCORK is the ability to increase the durability, the tear strength, and ultimately the longevity of products made with cork, which does open up a whole myriad of new market verticals. Footwear, because we started with sole. Footwear is the place that we thought we knew a dangerous amount enough about to actually try and bring it to commercialization at scale. Having spent a lot of time in Asia and in factories, we could figure out how to optimize it for the machinery, et cetera, in the footwear vertical. But there are a whole host of other applications. I mentioned yoga blocks, yoga mats, yoga blocks, but certainly into surf and surf traction. I've been lucky enough to surf on a couple of these boards, and in the cork, it has a natural sap material called suberin, and it has a little bit of stickiness to it when wet, which is ideal for surf. So it's incredibly grippy, and if your rashi or your wetsuit, you don't end up with wax all over your chest. If you forget your wax, you're fine. You don't need to wax your board anymore if you have a cork ReCORK topped surf deck on it. So other applications would be, say, dashes in automotive, again, for all of the thermal and acoustic and the dampening attributes of the physical property attributes of the material itself. And with this enhanced, stronger material formulation, there really aren't limitations to how we can use it. So I'm really excited about what we can do with the material, beyond just the footwear market vertical.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm learning so much. One thing that you mentioned is some of the limitations of cork and kind of how you tackled that aspect. And one of the limitations, the moisture thing, is really interesting to me, because with footwear, my initial thought with cork is Birkenstocks. And I've always been told that you shouldn't get your Birkenstocks wet because the cork will crack and then it just won't be usable anymore. So I want to know a little bit more about how you worked past, I guess, those things, and how your cork footwear would compare to other options available.
Yeah, certainly a good question. And that is what comes to mind for most people when they think about footwear and cork. There are in that application, in that formulation, in the ways in which most consumers would have come across cork and footwear, it would be in that thin film laminate form that I've mentioned, which would be in high-end luxury female wedges, for example. Go to Nordstrom footwear department and you'll see a lot of those. But beyond that, into more traditional sandals, what you often have is you have a small amount of cork floating in a slurry of some other material, often latex or blend thereof. So it's to say that those products are cork, I think is misleading, isn't entirely accurate. I'm not sure if I said the percentage, but like 10% of cork by volume, and it would be less by weight in those products. So I think it's a filler, and I mean, it's a lighter weight filler than the other material that's being used. But I think it's a bit of a misclassification to call those products cork. So why would they be not water friendly? Perhaps the leather, for one, is not going to love it. And I think it's the base material and not the cork itself that's leading to its lack of optimization for a water-based environment, if that makes sense. So in our formulation, we sort of flip it around. We are at 75% cork. So it's by far, obviously, majority cork. Binders that we use, we're up to 87% bio-based binder, which means we're at 97% bio-based material. We think that we can get to 100%. The standard for USDA bio is 25, which seems sort of oddly low. But ultimately, certainly our goal is to get 100% bio-based, and that would be a radical difference, both aesthetically and functionally, from what most people would associate with cork in footwear today.
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't know that about the like different percentages, and 25% does seem really low. That
Yeah.
seems a little bit strange. If you've enjoyed listening to this interview and any of our other interviews on the Outdoor Minimalist podcast, we'd love to hear from you. One super easy and free way to support our content is by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts. We thank you for listening to and supporting our work so that together we can create a better outdoor space as we recreate. So do you think then that your composite, so like with the ReCORK composite that you guys have designed, do you think that that can lead to a lot of really positive changes in the footwear industry and sustainability as a whole?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, the footwear is an enormous market. It's roughly, 24 billion pairs of shoes per year, if you can get your head around that number, which is just enormous. So there's a lot to tackle. There's a lot of there's a lot to help improve or to hope to improve. I would suggest that ReCORK is both aspirational in terms of trying to push the ball forward in that regard, but also functional or practical in the sense that with the current supply of cork, not including what we're able to recycle or collect from post-consumer, the annual production of virgin cork alone would get us into the low billions of pairs of midsoles. So it certainly depends on what type of shoe that you're talking about. When I say billions of pairs, but a cup sole that's used, say, on a Stan Smith or Nike Dunks or the Jordans that are so popular right now. Those are pretty low cork use or material use case. We could do many, many billions of those. So depending, on average, as we continue to increase the ratio of cork, so it's not just increasing the bio-based content to 100%, it's also using less and less of any binder of any kind. So trying to increase the use of cork. As we continue to do that, we think that we can continue to expand how much we're actually able to produce. So I think that percentage-wise of the total market is 10% or more a significant dent. It's a notable dent. I think Nike is 500 million pairs. I think Adidas is 400 and change in that ballpark of shoes that they produce annually. So it's a meaningful amount of change that we could affect in across brands and in the market in general. So yeah, I think it's not going to solve the entire market, but it definitely it's a push in the right direction and can have a material impact for sure.
That's a lot of shoes. A lot of shoes.
It's hard to comprehend, yeah.
When we are thinking about kind of pushing for more sustainable materials, I think a lot of times a big hang up, no matter the industry, is how well it functions in comparison to what is already there. Price also probably has a big impact. And I think you explained some of the functions really well earlier in terms of like the benefits of cork. But if we were to compare some common, I guess, synthetic materials used in shoes versus a ReCORK sole or midsole, how would it be functionality?
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, I think that, it's a great question. And I would say that the answer is it has to be equal. I don't think there's not a lot of appetite for less than in terms of price competitiveness, in terms of affordability. So it can't be 3x, 2x, even 1. It's got to be at parity in terms of price and function would be my short answer to that. So ultimately, it has to be the same underfoot experience. It has to have the same cushioning properties, flex properties, abrasion resistance properties when you get into outsoles. And what's pretty exciting is that we are able to tune, as I said, to individual needs. So the surf traction need is different than the running midsole need, which is different from the abrasion requirements of a ground contact outsole. So we are able to have sort of a catalog of grades to suit different applications. And that's all part of the same unlock, this ability to retain, but then also solve for, again, arguably the one functional limitation of the raw material, really unlocks new markets for cork.
Oh, that's great. I feel like I could keep asking you a lot of questions about cork, but I'm going to cap it here.
Sure.
So how can listeners learn more about ReCORK, the parent company Sole, and even participate in the ReCORK recycling program?
Well, we have thousands of collection partners across the US, across Canada. We will be opening up more in Portugal and the EU as well into the next year. So you can go to ReCORK.com and look up on the map the different collection locations. There are a few partners now that are doing sort of remote or mail-in collection as well. So ways to participate in the program are outlined on that website. The Sole website is yoursole.com, yoursole.com. Don't get that wrong. And there's, we have a pretty comprehensive blog, and obviously we talk about the story. And I guess my main point would be that if you have a choice, if you have options, when you are choosing with your dollars, choose cork. It is a scarce resource. It is not. It's not entirely limited, and it's you're not causing harm by buying. It's not endangered, I guess is the word. It's you're continuing to purchase cork, continues to support the industry. So choose cork when you can.
Thanks for listening, and if you like what you hear, let me know. Leave a review and be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can find us on Instagram at outdoor.minimalist.book, on YouTube, or subscribe to our weekly newsletter at theoutdoorminimalist.com. For even more updates, other educational resources, and to help build an outdoor community with the shared goal to create a better outdoor space as we recreate.